Yes, the International Lemna Association presents methods for duckweed bioprospecting. If you can see your screen, you will see a handful of duckweed there. That happens to be Lemna turrionifera, which I harvest routinely from one of my wild ponds that I have found in my region. I didn't know this pond existed 3 months ago until a friend pointed it out on the internet for me. Today I'm going to teach you how you can find ponds just like this, loaded with duckweed, in your vicinity, because as you know, duckweed grows around the world except for in the very coldest places on the planet. All right, so what's so special about duckweed? Well, as you know, you've heard and read and probably experienced for yourself the high protein levels that are found in duckweed when grown in a high nutrient solution, such as a swine lagoon or wastewater from a municipal setting. Protein levels vary depending on the nitrogen loads, anywhere from 12% protein all the way up to 43% protein. And considering that duckweed is such a prolific grower, it'll double its biomass. Here in the U.S., it's been reported recently as fast as doubling every 16 hours. Now, I have not experienced that myself. The literature usually talks about 24 to 36 hours, and I've experienced a 24-hour turnaround quite a number of times. It thrives on waste nutrients from, like I said, animal husbandry wastewater settings to municipal settings to just out in nature. Mother Nature knows how to grow it very, very well, just using organics from tree leaves that have fallen into the water and biodegraded. The nutrients that are duckweeds do not require a lot of nutrients, but they do, as all plants, require micronutrients as well as macros, PKNN, and just a host of things. They're not that picky to grow, but they are an amazing plant for cleaning up wastewater systems. Also, that they've found is that duckweed can reduce water evaporation on a pond surface by as much as 30%, which is fascinating when it comes to our slowly depreciating water volumes in, for example, in the U.S., in California, where they have open pond reservoirs, but the water evaporates, and they can't cover it up with anything because the ponds are so large. Enter duckweed. It'll remediate the water, keep it cleaner than it was before, reduce evaporation by as much as 30%. There's a lot of research going on for using duckweed because of its prolific biomass for bioenergy. I know researchers that are using it to grow or to produce bioethanol, biomethane naturally, biobutanol, and several other energy. They're even burning it outright. In one particular situation, there is an inventor that I am in contact with who can turn duckweed into a dry powder jet fuel to fly in the aviation markets. Also, the human food potential is there. For the most part, researchers are focusing on animal feeds, but there is a small but growing number of researchers looking at it for its high quality amino acid profile as a human food supplement. So over the next few years, you're going to be hearing more and more about this. And if you are anything like me, you're going to try to steer things in this direction. And last but not least, today I want to say that duckweed is used now in bioplastics in the United States. Because of its high protein content, it forms great complex systems within the filler for bioplastics. So it's a cheap way to go, and I would prefer to go with a higher value product to begin with, and that's why I go with what my focus is. But there are people who are doing it. If you've got plenty of duckweed, you can do anything you want with it. Okay, the existing options for obtaining duckweed specimens. You can go to eBay. For $6 or $8, you can get a handful of duckweed. It's no guarantees as to what species you're going to end up with because people are not well educated as far as the taxonomy part. But duckweed is available on eBay. The ILA, the International Lemna Association, has several members, including myself, who are willing to ship samples within the United States. I cannot ship to Texas or California, but other than that, I am free to ship it wherever I want. It's considered an invasive, noxious pest in Texas and California. Florida, I can get away with shipping it there, but they're a little more lenient on that. You can also get it from Rutgers, but you're going to get, you're going to get any species you want from the planet, grown anywhere and adapted to any situation just about. It's a little pricey. It's $50 to $70 for a sample, and you're going to get about 10 fronds, maybe 20, in a small little petri dish. So if you're looking for larger quantities on a consistent basis, and the reason we're here today is because you need to go source it yourself from your own region. Why? Because the strains locally that you have are adapted to your local ecosystems, your local weather, your local rise and fall of nutrient loads during the year. You can get lots and lots of duckweed locally, and I'm talking in terms of thousands of pounds. Some people are, when they find out you're looking for duckweed, they beg you to come and take it away from their ponds because they appreciate a clear surfaced pond. Well, as for me, if I see a duckweed loaded or a pond loaded with duckweed, to me that's a beautiful pond. Also, you want your duckweed to be easily accessible on a routine basis. Let's say you got overexuberant with fertilizer and you killed off a batch of duckweed, which is possible to do, or you starved it of too many nutrients and it's not thriving. It's gone into remission, so to speak, for a while. You can go back to that pond and you can collect another few gallons or thousands of pounds of it, whatever you need. You can't do that with eBay and you can't do that with Rutgers. And it's free. What more could you want? Now, the way that I actually find local ponds is by going to the website flashearth.com. You could go to googlemaps.com as well, but I'm more familiar with Flash Earth, and I'll show you how to go about it, how to recognize a duckweed pond in your area from a pond loaded with algae. You want to look for, and this is why I say train your eye, for the pond coloration, whether or not that pond is wind protected, either from buildings or from trees or shrubs, because duckweed, as you know, floats on the surface, and it's not going to thrive in a pond normally if the wind is constantly pushing it to one side and it ends up on shore and it dies. You want to watch for ponds with perimeter shading, normally trees and overhanging trees and bushes. Duckweed ponds love waste nutrient runoff from chicken barns, from hog systems or cattle pastures and so on, or human waste nutrients as well, I should say. And then the site logistics. As you're looking at these ponds, how far are they away from the nearest road? Because remember, if you're successful and you've bagged 30 gallons of duckweed, are you going to have to walk 4 blocks dragging heavy buckets of duckweed back to your car? You try to find a pond within, 25 to 50 feet of the nearest road. I've learned that the hard way, trust me. Okay, on flashearth.com, you will see a scene similar to this. If I'm going to, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to show you, on this particular scene, there are 3 duckweed ponds. It's a little small. If I could blow it up, I'm going to try here. Yeah, maybe not. But at any rate, if you look really hard, actually there are 4. What you're looking for when you look down at the earth, maybe 1,000 feet, is you're going to want to see this bright color with a little bit of dusty haze to it. Some are a little brighter than this. This is the first pond that I have ever found duckweed in, and it was in my own backyard. I lived in this home for 21 years, and I would take my kids to play out here, go fishing and so on, and I never knew what that green plant was floating on the water surface. As it turns out, it was duckweed, and that's 5 years ago. That's when I really started bringing it back to the house, putting it in kiddie pool, putting it in any kind of open container I could just to watch it grow. It's a very fascinating plant. Have you seen the others yet? All right, I'm going to slide over to the top left where you will see 2 rectangular wastewater treatment sewage lagoons. Those are loaded with duckweed as well. And also the last area, at the very top of the screen, you will see 3 chicken barns. Off to the lower right is a small duckweed pond. Now as you look for this coloration, see how close they are to the road. Look to see how close what kind of access you have. Are you going to have to crawl through a bunch of poison ivy? It's hard to tell from this angle, but believe me, I've found promising ponds here, there, and everywhere, but the logistics of getting to the shoreline of that pond require some fortitude, shall we say. Okay, also let's go back to this picture down to the lower right. This pond is very, very typical of a duckweed pond in that it is surrounded by trees and bushes. There was waste nutrient runoff from the manufacturing facility nearby. It was wind protected. That combination makes for a thriving, healthy duckweed. But while at the wastewater treatment lagoon in the top left, even though there is no wind protection from the northwest, and you can see where the wind blows to the southeast and creates a clear area, and then it just gets denser and denser and mats up as you go to the southeast. There is just so many nutrients there. The duckweed might be dying as it hits that southern shore because it builds up and it smothers it. It just crowds itself out. But there are so many nutrients, it's thriving so rapidly, they're growing so fast that it can keep up with the hazards that it has to encounter as far as biomass volume. Okay. When you do go to Google Earth or this particular website, think about training your eye to look for these particular colors of green as opposed to a darker green. Darker green is just plain old algae in the pond. And it's usually, the odds are in your favor if it's a small pond with heavily secluded, protected from the wind, nutrient loads. That's where you're going to find the duckweed as opposed to algae. Just about every time. This is what a typical pond looks like. This one is located from my current home. It's only 3 blocks away, and I didn't even know it existed until I was on a conversation with Paul Skillicorn. And he and I had gone online at flashearth.com, and we're just looking around the neighborhood. He discovered this one literally in my own backyard, and I didn't even know it was there because normally I look at a radius of 60 to 70 miles around my community. And he said, there you go. You don't have to go 70 miles. You've got plenty of duckweed right in your own backyard. So how did I go about being able to access this pond whenever I feel like? This one pond has seeded 2 major ponds for me. I've got 1.5 acres in production just from this pond. What I do is I went right up to the owners of the farm. It was a chicken farm. And I said, I would like permission to go to your small pond that I saw from an aerial view and look to see if you have duckweed growing on it. Well, the farmer said, well, I've got tons of duckweed. You want it? Come and get it. Take all you want, whenever you want. And that's pretty much been our standard agreement ever since. I have gone to that pond many, many times. That's what I call cold calling. You just beat on their front door. But if you don't know for sure who owns that pond, for heaven's sakes, go to the neighbors. Go to the houses in the region and ask, do you know who owns that property 3 blocks down the street? They'll usually be able to tell you. And if there's no one home and you can't figure it out, you can always go to your county courthouse, to your PVA office, which stands for Property Valuation Administrator, and they have maps of everywhere in the county, and they'll be able to pinpoint the owner for you real fast. Or go on the internet. Some properties are off limits unless you happen to be in the know with the people who are in charge of that property. For example, state and federal parks, Indian reservations, burial grounds, those are off limits. I don't even try in those situations. I would like to tell you a funny story about someone. Paul Skillicorn told me this one. He said, I asked him if there was any story that he remembers from all of his years of bioprospecting duckweed around the planet. He said, well, I remember one in Cancun. He and his buddies were in a Suburban, and they were going down a rutted, rocky road in the middle of a jungle near Cancun. They had driven 5 miles, and it had taken them an hour and a half to go 5 miles because they were dodging boulders, and it was very, very rugged terrain. Finally, they came upon a clearing, and they were out bioprospecting for duckweed. They came upon a clearing where there was this beautifully manicured hedge, about 12 feet tall, alongside of the road. And they all looked at each other and said, well, that's pretty bizarre, because they'd gone from jungle to this manicured hedge. They drove and drove along the edge of this tall green wall. Finally, they came to a gate. And Paul, being Paul, said, I want to see what's on the other side of this wall. So the other said, we'll stay in the car. So he jumped over the gate, and he walked, and there, by golly, was another wall of green, perfectly manicured. The grass was mowed between these 2 walls that ran parallel with each other. It was the most bizarre thing he'd ever seen. Well, he walked and he walked until he came to a little clearing in that hedge. And what do you think he saw on the other side? He estimated 200 perfectly groomed, manicured hectares of marijuana. So he was standing there getting an eyeful of all this when about 24 workers who had been standing near pickup trucks glanced up and saw him. And they all started waving their arms, and they were dragging out, running in their trucks trying to get guns. And he thought, oh boy, now I've done it. So he turned around and he took off like a shot, back for the gate. He leaped over the gate. He jumped in his car and started taking off pell-mell down this horrible road, worried that his suspension was going to go out. And behind him, the gates opened, trucks came ripping out with guns blazing. Now, he and his buddies escaped with their life and their vehicle fairly intact, but that was the last time he ever tried to, just out of curiosity, find out what was going on, and without getting permission from the landowner. So now that you've gotten permission, here's what you do to actually assemble what you need to be able to do it. This list: hat, boots, chest waders, gloves, long pants, long sleeve shirt. This is all common sense, just to protect yourself from ticks, snakes, poison ivy, etc. Mosquito and tick repellent. We have Lyme disease in our area. I'm hoping that you will take precautions if you do go out this summer, wherever you may be. Sunscreen, bottle of water, cell phone, first aid kit. But as far as the work gear itself, what are you going to need to get this duckweed out of the water? I recommend a simple swimming pool, pole, and net. And I use one that can extend out 12 feet. I never extended out 12 feet. I usually go 8 or 10 because the further out you go, the more flimsy it gets. Some 5-gallon plastic buckets, a camera, and a notebook and pen. This is to log the pool scene, find out what the flora and fauna is, and if you're able to bring a pH meter, any kind of testing equipment. Ammonias are really good to test for, ammoniums, and so on. Also bring garbage bags or Ziploc bags if you're only going after a little bit of material. Well, the garbage bags are if you're going after huge amounts. And an ice cooler if you're worried that your samples are going to get over 92, 93 degrees Fahrenheit for very long, because you don't want them cooking by the time you get back home. Here's a picture of me sampling that very first pond I was telling you about. This is early in the spring. The leaves were just starting to pop out. And the primary species in that pond at that time of year is Wolffia. If you feel it between your fingers, it feels like it rolls around like little green ball bearings or cream of wheat grains. And as the season gets warmer, usually the Wolffia succeeds to the Lemna minor that's in that pond. Here's another pond. One thing you want to watch for is sticks in the water, because they will tear up a net if you're not careful. So what do you do with all this duckweed that you're going to bring home? The night before, I would suggest that you fill up some containers, keeping in mind how much you really truly want to bag. Fill up some containers with water, let the chlorine evaporate off overnight, unless you're lucky enough to have rainwater handy. Then for containers themselves, again, depending on how much you want of duckweed, try to make your containers large enough. It's better to be broad and shallow than narrow and deep. But if they're very, very shallow, for example, a glass pan, be careful that they don't evaporate, and be careful that it doesn't get too hot. Over 92, 93 degrees Fahrenheit with water temperature, your duckweed's going to stop growing regardless. So try to avoid galvanized containers if at all possible, and I'm not sure what the chemical reactions are, but I have crashed duckweed using an old galvanized horse watering trough. Here's what fresh duckweed harvested looks like. This particular duckweed is a Lemna turrionifera, and the roots are about 1.5 inches long, which means that it was doing pretty good, and then it slowed down. The nutrient load went down because the duckweed efficiently pulled all the nitrates and ammoniums out. But it was still, the roots were still short enough that next time we had a heavy rain, that duckweed would take off like a shot and do its doubling in biomass literally overnight. So don't forget, when you get your duckweed home and you get it in the water, try to keep it to where the duckweed is a single layer across the entire surface of the container. If it's too thick, you're going to have self-shading. If it's too thin, you're going to encourage sunlight to go into the lower parts of the water column, and algae will grow. You don't want that. Try to, in the beginning, the first week, try to go with semi-shade as your duckweed adjusts to its new area. Always go for wind protection whenever possible. Sometimes I would clump potted plants, big tall potted plants that I had around my little duckweed ponds. Right now I've got test ponds growing that I have planted sunflowers all the way around the perimeter. Unfortunately, they're only 6 inches high right now, so I have to add on additional walls of netting to slow the wind down, because it will blow off to one side and it will dry out and kill off the under layers. So that's one of the downfalls with duckweed, but it's easily fixed. Predator protection. If you live on a farm and you want to try to go duckweed for your fish or your chickens or your ducks, Keep them away from the duckweed while you're getting it established. That's all I can say. They will eat it up. And fertilizer requirements. First thing I do when I get duckweed into a new container is I go out and I get a shovel full of dirt and throw it in the water. The micronutrients from the dirt and the PKN, no matter how low it is, that's enough to stabilize that water system and get your duckweed growing, slowly but growing. Then you're left with the choice of, do you want to go with an animal manure for fertilizer, or do you want to go with 20-20-20, for example? If you go with 20-20-20, I suggest you throw in a pinch of sea salt, unrefined if you can get it, depending on how much volume you have in your container. If you go with animal manure, try to go for something that's not aged too long. Put it in a bag and let it soak in the water like a tea bag. The best way to handle it is when you get your duckweed home, put it in 4 containers if you're going to go with the organic fertilizer. Put it in 4 containers, and to each container with the same amount of water in, put, for example, you have to, every situation's different. Put, example, a teaspoon of manure tea in the first one. Put 2 teaspoons in the second. Put 3 in the third. Put 4 in the fourth. Take notes. Watch it over the period of week. See which container responds the best. That's how you know how much nutrients to continually add. Anytime you pull duckweed out of a pond or a little system, you want to put those nutrients back into the pond in the form of manure tea or 20-20-20, for example. That way the duckweed will have a fairly consistent balance of nutrients. Okay, here's a bucket. Don't do this. These buckets, I had brought way too much duckweed home one day, and this duckweed is 1.5 inches thick, and within the course of a couple of days, it smothered the duckweed underneath, and it began to stink pretty bad. So only go for a across the top, depending on the species. Wolffia fills in all the gaps between larger leafed or fronded species. So you want to not let sunlight get into the lower area, but you don't want to put so much in that it will self-shade like this did. I think the general rule of thumb is 600 grams per square meter fresh weight. Here's some I was bagging up to send to a friend. And this is a test pond that I've currently got going. I'm pulling out probably 30 to 50 gallons every day out of this particular pond. I'm solar drying it and using it for my applications. And happy bioprospecting, folks. Thanks for being here.